Welcome, everyone. Tandra is kindly supporting our session, and she's recording. So we are delighted to be here today. Particularly, we're thrilled to gather this afternoon to continue our Pride Month celebration. Today, we're excited to be partnering with In Our Own Voices, which is a national nonprofit working to ensure the physical, mental, spiritual, political, cultural, and economic survival and growth of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people of color communities. This afternoon, we feel uniquely privileged to be hosting Tara LaGrone, CEO of In Our Own Voices, who has graciously offered to be our Pride Month keynote speaker. But before we formally introduce Tandra and pass the mic to her, I am honored to introduce David Scable, president of Excelsior University, who has offered to say a few words about Pride Month. David?
Thank you, Daniel, and Tandra, thank you for being with us, and thank you all on this webinar. As you all know, June is Pride Month, when LGBTQ plus communities celebrate the freedom to be themselves. And Pride celebrations are grounded in the arduous history of those who've struggled with prejudice and freedom to be truly who they are. And so Pride events welcome all allies from outside the LGBTQ plus communities, from inside the communities, to show their support, to listen, to engage, to talk, and to learn. So Pride Month commemorates the events in June in New York City in 1969, when the police raided the gay bar Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village. 3 days of riots ensued after years of harassment and violent behavior by authorities against the gay community. As a result of fierce advocating by prominent gay activists such as Brenda Howard, who also is known as the mother of Pride, who organized the first gay parade in New York City, and Harvey Milk, one of the first openly gay elected officials in the US, we celebrate and acknowledge the need for everyone to have the freedom to be themselves, to be able to express themselves, and to love who they love. So Excelsior University has the honor of joining this year's Pride Month by joining we joined the Capital Region Pride Parade last week, and we're thrilled to have had the opportunity to participate and remain inspired by such a powerful celebration of life, rights, choice, and love. So thank you for being here. Daniel, thank you for organizing, and I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, David. Thank you for your words. And now I am honored to introduce Tara LaGrone, CEO of In Our Own Voices. Tandra has been an advocate for HIV/AIDS treatment in the African-American community, especially for women and young Black men, for over 32 years. Wow. She is a member of the New York State Minority Health Council and served on the Capital Region Albany Police Department Reinvention and Reform Collaborative. Tandra is a board member of CenterLink and CLEAR, both of which focus on the advancement of LGBTQ people. She leads and actively contributes to various activist efforts, academic conferences, and events on lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender issues, focusing on the people of color community. Tandra, we're honored to have you today. Thank you for your inspiring leadership, for your exciting partnership, and welcome to Excelsior University.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to just start off by letting folks know this is not going to be your traditional keynote speech. I was sharing this earlier. I can sit and give you 15 minutes or so of a speech, but I've decided to also make this interactive. So it is important for us to understand the power that lies in all of us. And with that being said, I'm going to say happy Pride. We had Black and Indigenous People of Color Pride, which was BIPOC Pride on June 10th. and it celebrated its 17th year, formerly known as Say It Loud, Black and Latino Gay Pride. This year, we had a record number of participants. And like the president said, we also marched in the parade on June 11th. But I also want to bring notice and give you a bit of history. The first time a large group of Black, Indigenous people of color marched in the Capital Region parade was in 2006. I think that is important for us to understand the context in which the work that still needs to be done and where we have come from historically with what it means to be LGBTQI plus in this community. I will remind us that the LGBT community is not a monolithic community. Within our community, there's rich diversity. And we don't often get the opportunity to talk about what that diversity means and the impact of that diversity. So therefore, just like in mainstream communities, sexual minorities still face racism, all of the isms, and we are still subjected to the same structures that are faced by mainstream cisgendered individuals. We also face those as well. And so today, what I really want to talk to you about again is I just got to say happy Pride, and it is June. But for us to understand that June is just 1 month out of the year. Unfortunately, I'm not going to say unfortunately or fortunately from my case, it is as the CEO of In Our Own Voices, I live in Pride 365 days a year. I'm a Black lesbian woman. I am a survivor of childhood sexual assault. And I get to bring all of those components to my work and all of my identities. So today, what I'm going to ask you, and this whole speech is mainly about, and this keynote is about what is service to others for the higher good. And what does that mean? So by serving others, you will lead by example and by leading with your heart. Everything in life about giving and receiving and about our gracious acceptance and thriving of yourself to others will benefit from your unique, irreplaceable talents. Being in service to others also means in service to yourself. I'm going to repeat that. It also means being in service to yourself. Serving others require you to refill your well, to feed yourself so that you may have the energy and the balance to give back to people who will best receive those wonderful gifts. So as we relate that to Pride Month and the LGBT community, we also have to acknowledge the fact that we are all, as LGBT members of the community and our allies, that LGBT, Black, Indigenous communities face additional barriers, such as oppression, marginalization, internalized racism, and stigma when navigating through society. And instead of me using it in third party, I can include myself. We often do not feel safe and invisible in mainstream settings due to historical and current policies and procedures and attitudes that are not inclusive, not only to our communities, but that they also do not allow safe space for our community to bring our multiple identities and experiences to the table. As I stated earlier, I gave you, and you know, as a lesbian woman of color, I often every day I counted, I think it was just in the month of June, so far, I've outed myself 625 times, and we're not even in the end of June. And what does that mean? And what does that feel like? Because as a cisgendered person, how many times a day do you remind people or utilize in your language that you're a cisgendered heterosexual person in a day? That's what it means like for LGBT communities. And by the way, my pronouns are she and her. Therefore, it is critical that we invest in resources and services provided by and for our community. The president talked about Stonewall, and here are some things that you may or may not know about Stonewall. Marsha P. Johnson coined the phrase, "Pay it no mind." And she coined that phrase because that the day of the march and the parade, which was based on a riot, it was organized, but Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera were not invited. They were excluded because they were considered drag queens and transgender women. And the organizers felt that the two of them would hurt their cause while they were marching. What do you think that Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia did? They got a hold of when the event was going to take place. They camped out and they arrived 3 hours before the event. And that's that picture that you see of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera with their power to the people fist up. And that's the reason why they were at the head of that parade, is because they showed up but were not invited. So in the spirit of pay it no mind, it is important for us to know that there is no wrong door for LGBT folks to walk through. And we create those spaces. And when we create those spaces, we have to create those spaces to know that we must look through all those services and all of providers that are providing services through an intersectional lens. And for a lot of us that have been doing this work for a very long time, we show up before the event. And we are prepared to utilize our voices. With the appropriate framework and context, we know that training, technical assistance, collaboration, and mechanisms for accountability need to happen. Unlike culturally specific services, culturally relevant services are programs and services that might target a specific population, but are delivered by the providers who are not a part of that community, but understand the true meaning of service to others. So we all, through the feeling of what's happening in our society today, we feel this change and shifts in the atmosphere. We feel that there is an unrest. And with that unrest, we know that there is anti-legislation, anti-LGBTQ legislation, anti-Blackness legislation, anti-women legislation, that includes trans women, women that are non-binary and gender non-conforming, is rising. It's at its all-time high in this country, threatening not only LGBTQ, IA+, but all of our rights. The increasing stigma, eroding legal protection. Today, there are more than 500 anti-LGBT bills that have been introduced. 55 of them have passed. Most of those laws are targeting transgender people. These anti-LGBT laws are damaging and have severe consequences to all of our communities. But more importantly, especially to LGBTQ survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. Laws that strip LGBT people of legal protections from discrimination in employment, housing, while leaving LGBT survivors who are attempting to exit abusive relationships or rebuild the aftermath of violence more financially vulnerable. Laws reversing marriage equality, attacking LGBT parental rights who rob LGBT people of critical legal protections and the right to raise their children. We cannot afford to place more restrictions or barriers on LGBT people, ability to access healthcare, financial security, social safety, and legal protection. In particular, we are seeing the most terrifying to year's date of legislation attack on the broadest anti-LGBT, the broadest transgender bathroom legislation in our country's history, going as far to attack the rights of transgender non-binary people from accessing public spaces that align with their gender identity, including restrooms, locker rooms, prison facilities, and more. And add cruelty that these laws specifically also name domestic violence shelters and rape crisis centers. And we know that 1 in 2 transgender individuals will experience violence in their lifetime. 1 in 4 lesbians will experience violence in their lifetime. So to further strip transgender survivors of safety and as well as in shelters, we've seen this with the legislators and laws that are passed in Florida, Kansas, and a copycat bill that was just introduced in Alabama, SB 180. I urge you to look up SB 180. And I ask you all, we need to rally around our communities and speak up against these laws. Excuse me for 1 second. I leave you with this. And you all are probably familiar with this poem. Excuse me, I'm gonna probably get a drink of water. 1 second. I'm gonna pause.
For those who might have missed it, Tandra needed a minute to get a drink of water, so we're on hold for a second.
Yes, I apologize. What comes with the end of June is allergies. So I leave you with this. which is this poem. And you all may be familiar with the poem. And thank you for giving me grace as I pick up my water. First, they came for the communists. And I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists. I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists. I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews. I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. Context to this poem is that Martin actually was a Nazi and a pastor of a church. And he believed in the fact that he did not belong to these other groups and actually supported the treatment of these other groups that many folks are not really clear on what this poem is really about. Not until he spoke out against the church did they lock him up and no one came for him. No one came for him. Today, they came for reproductive justice, Roe versus Wade. They came for Black and brown folks, George Floyd. They came for LGBT rights, Don't Say Gay. They came for transgender and gender non-conforming, Drag Queen Story, SB 180. Will you speak in the service of others and yourself? Thank you.
Thank you, Tandra. This powerful and inspiring. Let me say back a few things that I gathered as you were sharing your remarks. How often are we reminded of our gender identity and sexual orientation? Some are reminded about it many times each day. There is no wrong door for LGBTQ plus folks to walk through, but we need to create the necessary safe spaces. How can we show up intentionally, authentically, and early? And I loved the poem. I did not speak out. I think this is so powerful because I was not one of them. Then they came for me and there was no one left. Will you speak in service of others and yourself? Very provocative and thoughtful remarks, Tandra, and your leadership and your life work really speaks very strongly to these points that you have made. So thank you. As Tandra mentioned, today's session was not a traditional keynote of just us listening, but it's us engaging. So the hope is that we can engage in a question and answer or comment format. So we'll open the space for folks. Let me see, Naila, can people just ask a question, or should we use a quick Q&A?
You can use the Q&A, that works.
Okay, so if you could then post any questions you might have in the Q&A space, we'll be monitoring that. But while you think about that, I have a question for Tandra, which is quite aligned with what you were sharing. At Excelsior University, we have been working on a framework that is based on a few models, one of which, the developmental model for intercultural sensitivity, has a very strong focus on how can we challenge the way in which we perceive and interact with difference. And there are a number of authors that very eloquently talk about how one of our greatest challenges as human beings is our fear of difference, particularly the difference that we, of course, cannot understand because we haven't walked those shoes or because we haven't gone through that experience. The differences that are very new to us. So as we continue our work at Excelsior to challenge our likely inherent fear of difference, right? And as you think of the work that you do, Tandra, and the words that you share with us, what are particular approaches or strategies that you would recommend that we use in order for us to truly challenge those assumptions and to perceive and interact differently?
When we're talking about differences and fearing, you and I had this conversation earlier, that if we're approaching it from a space of empathy, right? And that empathy is empathy for oneself first. And to lean into the fact that all of our discomforts are learning lessons, and that the fear often lies in a few grounded parts for ourselves, from our experiences, from an experience that did not allow us to feel safe, and did not allow us to be vulnerable in differences. And the fact that we are socialized in a way that leans to giving power and power structures to look a certain way. And we're socialized that from the time that we're born. Everybody knows the doll study, when all of across the countries, they have different shades leading up to a dark-skinned doll, to a white doll, and they ask all kids, and even today, this is still relevant today, is which is the bad doll, which is the good doll, and 80 to 90% of the kids always picks the black doll as being bad. Mm-hmm. And which doll do they think is an angel and a good doll? And then they go to the white doll and says, this is a good doll. So we are socialized, and in between the black, dark-skinned picture and doll and the white doll, there's an array of colors, right? That are speaking to BIPOC and Indigenous people of color. And in between that, it is always on the darker side that we have fear, and that we struggle with around acceptance. So leaning into the structures around anti-Blackness and what that means, or the fear of different in any capacity, is socialized in us, and we have to understand what that means and how that impacts us on a daily basis, whether what we look at with folks with visible or invisible disabilities, whether we're looking at folks, women, cisgender women. It is all of these things of differences that we are socialized to say that that's not a normal way to approach things, and that the power in that has to look a certain way. So I challenge people to lean into those discomforts. And the other piece I like to ask people, when people ask me, we did years ago, we did I Am Gay campaign throughout the Capital Region. And we got tons of phone calls and the phone calls were mainly saying, I see these billboards. I don't want my children to see these billboards because I don't want my children to be gay.
Hmm.
And my response to that was, as growing up from a 6-year-old, I would have loved to have had seen a billboard that would have made me straight. We would have just been like, wow, if that's all it took, it would have probably saved me a lot of injustice and heartache that I could just drive by and go, oh, that billboard, I'm straight now.
That is an excellent point you make, Tandra. One of the things that was most powerful and resonated is the amount of times that you have had to come out in the month of June alone, and we're not even, completed the month of June, right? And how impactful is it that some of us never have to think about that. Some of us never have to, we say it with such ease, who we are, what we are, and how we identify. And the people that are most important to us and that shape our everyday, we can freely talk about them without having to, worry or think about any consequences. And so I wonder if you could talk about how powerful is it to create a space where, when you hear folks saying, oh, well, we work in a business where, sexual orientation shouldn't matter, and why do we have to bring any of that to work when we should just do the work at hand, and none of that really is, it doesn't affect the product, right, that we produce. Can you talk about a little bit why that mentality is so harmful and so incorrect, right, in creating a community and creating a space where people feel safe?
Right. And we call it, it's being blinded by, all of the things. It's no differently, Pam, when someone says, oh, I don't see color. Well, I'm sitting here as a Black African-American woman. You cannot just say that even on this screen that there is not a variation in our skin tones, right? And to honor that, right? So when someone says, oh, it's, and I look at that color blindness and all of this blindness that we have that perpetuates the fact that it will feed into the power structures and to feeding into white supremacy and white privilege, so let's name it. And for someone to say that their identities don't impact the work that they're doing, it is totally incorrect, because we know the most productive spaces are spaces that contain the most diversity. And that means that that diversity, and when I'm speaking, I'm just not speaking about race. I'm just speaking across the board with diversity, that when people are able to be authentic, and not only in their careers and in their life, that they are most productive. And it's almost like saying that you don't matter, right? It's like, okay, why should this, we don't care that, about this and this, and you don't matter. But it does impact how we view people as human beings and all their complexities. And we are very complex folks. And, I had a friend of mine say, to me, a very good friend of mine who's an ally, and said, it really doesn't bother me. Like, gay people don't bother me at all. And, I never had a problem with gay people. Again, as I said about the billboard, my response to that, well, heterosexual people don't bother me either. And I don't have a problem with them either. So it's like we look on and not able to say, and this is the reason why I love In Our Own Voices, is because I'm blessed and humbled that I get up every day and I don't have to put any part of me in compartments or on shelves. And that space, and for the space and the staff that work at In Our Own Voices, they get to do that too. And it's acknowledging their humanity and their rights. And so any space that I, train around, the historical Black colleges in the South, I did a training about 5 or 6 years ago. I said, it's just a moment. No, it was about 10 years ago. So it's just a matter of time before you all are going to be calling me back. And sure enough, you get the call back because they were not ready at that time, but they're ready now. And so I like to say that to really lean in and challenge those who have that, they have that perspective because it's a safe perspective.
Thank you, Tandra. We have a question from our viewers. Our wonderful colleague, Nan Rodriguez, has asked a question, and her question is, what would you most want your straight allies to know or do when we are trying to stand in support of the LGBTQI+ community? What are we getting right and what are we getting wrong?
So that's and thank you, is it Nan?
Nan, yes.
Right. What I would like folks to know and stand and how to support. Obviously, the first thing that you can do is to give to BIPOC leadership organizations. And not everyone can do that, but you can also give your time, or you can also send an email and say, I see you and thank you. Those are really important because this work is very taxing. And the other thing that I like to say is to use your voice if it's safe, because safety is not safe for some folks, even our allies, to speak. And the other part of it is that the internet and Google are such wonderful tools. Instead of asking someone, Google it, research, do your own homework. Don't rely on other folks to educate you around pronouns or any other questions that you may have. And the things that you are doing right is that I feel the most piece of it is that educating yourself on that piece. But you all, in every mobilization and in every place of where folks have mobilized throughout this country, allies have been present. And I have never seen so many allies stepping up and using their voice and being a screen and accomplice for this movement and for LGBT folks. And especially around what's happening with the drag queen stories. You have so many allies was like, that doesn't make sense. It does not make sense. You have a choice. You don't have to read a book. You don't have to join in, but you don't have the right to take the space away from other people. So you all, as allies, are getting a lot of that stuff right. And the last piece, it is that I think, as far as in our voices is concerned, we are seeing those voices being utilized on social media. And that's the biggest place that we really need folks. We need bodies, but we also need social media, on social media. And give.
Tandra, you mentioned a few times ways in which we can begin to engage. So how can we show up intentionally, authentically, and early? How can we speak up in service of others and ourselves? You have had an amazing experience, right? 32 years supporting the community, and of course the work of In Our Own Voices, right? So inspiring and so powerful. We are an academic institution, and I think we have responsibilities based on that, not only to our students, but to the community around us. When you think of academic institutions and the work that needs to be done and the experience that you have had serving the community, what are spaces or approaches that we should not miss? What are ways in which you would encourage us to think, or areas that you would encourage us to explore to do better?
I would, there's a few, and one, it is touching base with all of your students and asking them that question. What are we needing to create safer spaces for you?
Mm.
And that comes from your students and their voice. Their voice is the number one voice. The other piece of it is to have all of the faculty trained and make those trainings mandatory prior to any semester, or once or twice a year, and it not be an hour and a half training, that it is a intentional training to look at what it means to be culturally relevant and culturally responsive, which are two different things. That goes beyond DEI work. It starts with breaking down the very systems and what the institution has been built on, and acknowledging that that institute has been built on these policies and procedures, and also a system that looks a certain way. And so I would start there.
Thank you, Tandra. Okay, I'm going to remind the audience, if you have questions, post them in the chat so that we can convey them to Tandra. Here's one from another wonderful colleague, Kamel Abdullahi. He says, Tandra, thank you so much, Kamel, for the question. Tandra, as expected, some thought-provoking and affirming words. You're a well-recognized leader in the Capital Region and a respected administrator. How do we support the development of community and organizational leaders who see social justice and equity as foundational, not additive?
Making a space at the table for invitation and for voices to be heard. And that additive piece comes in when you have a table and you look around that table and there are clearly bodies and people missing. And it looks a certain kind of way, right? And we, the organizers and leaders around this need to also understand the historical foundation of what it means on mobilizing and principles. A lot of the work that is being done has been done out of an outrage to what is being visible, seen, or felt. And some parts of those mobilization and inviting folks to, they are really in need of guiding principles of around what it means to do community organizing. And I think that it would be a great thing to pull both groups together and have them at the table, and to have these pieces of being able to listen and to be able to share the tools of what it means around those principles. I mean, the fact of it is that a lot of the work that's been done here locally, there's only few of the activists and social justice group are really grounding themselves with community organizing and principles, and how do you structure that? That is just, there's an injustice being done and everybody show up, or that there's injustices that are done in boardrooms and police stations and all levels of systems and, health departments across the board. How do you organize in that way? So I would start there, that I answer your question. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Kamel, for the question. And by the way, Kamel is the one who introduced me to Phil, Tandra.
Oh, awesome.
So he's the one who led us to today. So thank you, Kamel.
Yeah. Phil is Interim Voices COO. Yeah.
So Tandra, I have another question that kind of it's another layer of the question that I asked before. One of the concepts that we have been discussing recently at Excelsior, based on another keynote by a wonderful colleague, Lou Raja, who talked about the concept of what he calls Ubuntu, that is our need to see, or the opportunity to see the humanity in each other, to be able to see ourselves in others and to see others in ourselves. And that makes me think of this very unfortunate seeming perception of some, that the relationships in which we engage, and particularly our perception of the LGBTQI plus community, is a zero-sum game, right? That if someone loses, the other one wins, and if someone wins, the other one loses. If you have had the opportunity to read Heather McGhee, right, in her book of the sum of us, right, which is trying to challenge that assumption, and that's what Ubuntu gets to, right? For me to succeed, everyone needs to succeed, right? And for someone else to succeed, we also need to succeed. And how do we develop that that understanding and that approach of us trying to see ourselves in others, right? I've been thinking a lot about that recently. Like when I'm out in the community, what do I need to do to see myself in others? Who look different than me, who behave different than me, who think different than me? What do I need to do to help others see themselves in me? Right, there's a whole other question that brings a whole other set of thoughts in terms of what do I need to do to make that happen? And both of them are not only opportunities, I think, responsibilities. Can you comment about that and what your thoughts are from your perspective?
I think early on in my keynote, I talked about empathy and empathy for self. When you have empathy for self, you're more likely to see yourself in others, because you have sat in a place of that your vulnerability or the shame that you're feeling and all wrapped up, because the lack of those things of being vulnerable doesn't allow us to see ourselves and others, because we are really stuck in that place of what that feeling is right now, that I need to be able to be self-protective. And when you're in self-protective mode, you can't see the other person's pain or their joy or their even understanding of what they have experienced historically. But if I can sit and simply have empathy, and one of the things I love about Quakers teaching, the Quakers teaching sits you in those places, right? I don't agree with everything about the Quakers, but I do agree about those the certain parts of that, and it is that piece around, if I am the pebble that I'm going to throw into this pond and these ripples are going to come out, and all of those ripples are touching people as you go along, that you're able to sit in a place and understand that people are really a reflection of their experiences, and not necessarily that you have to be able to control those experiences, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So, for example, Biden and Vice President Harris won. And I said, oh, got off of work. I had my big old great gay rainbow scarf around my neck. I'm happy. I go to stop at Price Chopper, go to the deli, still masked up, and ordering some lunch meat for my then 9-year-old, and was blocked by this, by this white man. And I'm with no mask on, and I'm like, excuse me. And it was just, I'm not moving. And later he followed me and tried to run me off the road. And during the whole process, I was sitting in such a place of joy. Like, they showed me the videotape of this person literally following me through this whole supermarket. And here I am and in joy. I'm in this joy, like not even aware of any of my surroundings. And they show me pushing my little cart to my car, and I get in and these lights are flashing on me. I'm like, what the heck? And they caught all this. I say this because even through that, and what was later understood, his anger for the fact that we had the first African-American vice president, that's what he said. I still sat in a place to understand what it meant for this white man to have given up power and to experience the historical piece around this and what it meant for his life. And understood that feeling of loss that created him to be in such anger to create violence. And what does that mean, right? And so I give you these bits and pieces for you to understand that even in the midst of something, we still have to sit in a place to have empathy.
Right. Thank you. That's powerful. Thank you, Tandra. We have one more question from our provost, Chris Kessler.
Wow.
Yes, so
Nervous
thank you.
here.
Thank you, Chris. Great presentation. Thank you. He says, is there a particular model of community organizing or a need for a new model, given the escalation of aggressive behaviors towards LGBTQ plus community? If not, what models are working? Do we need a new version of Marsha P. or Harvey Milk or groups like ACT UP to reemerge?
I think that we need a combination of both. What the historical community organizing gave, like I think about, Selma and all of the things that are in that, Alabama, and the restraint that people went through of the training to get to sit at that lunch counter, right? And to be unwaved and to practice the principles based on built off of Gandhi's principles of peaceful protesting. I think for me, and that's a good question, there has to be the foundational piece, and we also have to know what's working and what has worked. And there are some amazing things that Black Lives Matter and other organizers have done that have worked. And some of it are based on the historical principles around community organizing and with some twist to it. It's like anything you have to do. But I think what I fear of is when there's no basic principles.
Mm.
That's my fear. And that there is a reaction, a couple of weeks ago, I was down at the police station because they were gathering. And one of the things that I noticed that was missing, you had all this energy, but there was no direction for it to go. And I think that causes a lot of dangerous things can happen and create unsafe environments. The Marsha P. and Harvey, those are the basic, those are like the historical foundational ones. But even farther back, when you look at Barrett, Barrett, that did the organizing for Martin Luther King. All of it, and he was a Black gay man who did that, and the March on Washington. Those principles worked, right? And we have to honor those and incorporate it into the work that we're doing now. And I say that because you have so amazing young people with energy and talented and that are brilliant.
Thank you, Tandra. So we're approximating the end of our time. Let me say, everyone, thank you for your questions and for your engagement. Tandra, thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing your knowledge, your experience, your expertise with us. Let me also say, I am so sorry you went through that supermarket experience.
Oh, thank you.
Because if we need to support each other, right? It's very unfortunate, and I love your ability to still focus on empathy and understanding of others. But today has been an inspiration and a wonderful learning experience, Tandra. We are honored to have had you. If you see the chat, it's flowing with thank yous and appreciation. So thank you, everyone. Yeah. We have recorded it, so we'll make it available so that others can also watch it. And have a fantastic Pride Month. Pam, you want to say something?
Before we go, I'd just like to say that we want to keep Pride alive, right past June, 365 days. So we have our gender and sexuality community. If you have any ideas, if you want to participate, if you want your voice to be heard, please, please, please let us know. We're there, we're here to hear you. We're here to create a safe space. So that is how we continue to keep Pride alive past June.
Yes.
And leave the allergies in June, but continue on with Pride for 365 days.
Absolutely. And whatever I can do to assist in any way, I am only an email or a phone call away.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. And more importantly, thank you for making the space to be able to shift from your non-traditional way of approach. And it is my hope that moving forward, that keynotes are looked at differently.
Thank you, Tandra. And for those who enjoyed today's conversation, we are already working with in our own voices. They are very kindly working on, or we're exploring the opportunity of having them come to help us with allyship training. And we're strongly looking forward to that. So Absolutely. More to come. Yes. Tandra, thank you. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nyla. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.